Hello, Batchy. Are you looking forward to part 3? Yes. What have you been doing today? Batchy's been sleeping a lot this morning and he's going to go out for a walk later. Shall we take you to the fields? He's looking at me like you better take me. Oh, very tired. Okay. Let's listen to part 3 now. Okay, bye, Batch. Okay, so here we are with part 3. Sir Ironsoul stopped at once with a whir and a click. His sword was inches from Gretel's throat. The prince's song rang out sweetly through the parlour. Gretl could only stare in horror at Sir Ironsoul and his sword, in wonder at the prince. "Where did you come from?" she said. "Are you the little prince in the story?" "I think you must be, but how cold you are, and who is this? How sharp his sword is. I don't like him at all. Oh, what must I do? I feel I'm supposed to do something, but I don't know what it is." There was no one to help. She was alone with the 2 little figures, one all in malice, the other all sweetness. Gretl touched the prince's cheek gently and found it cold, but her touch awoke something in his machinery for an instant, and he turned his eyes to hers and smiled. "Oh, you poor thing," she cried. He opened his lips and sang 1 or 2 notes. "I know what it is," said Gretl. "You're not well, and I don't like that little knight one bit, and I don't want to leave you here with him. I know whose fault this is. It was Fritz who made the story up. If only we could find out how it finished." She looked at the stove where Fritz had thrown the sheets of paper on which his story was written. She had thought they were all destroyed, but crumpled up on the floor in the shadow, there was one piece left unburnt. She picked it up and straightened it out. It was the very piece he had been reading when the stranger had come in. On it were the words, "He was very tall and thin, with a prominent nose and jaw. His eyes blazed like coals in caverns of darkness. His hair was long and grey, and he wore a black cloak with a loose hood like that of a monk. He had a harsh, grating voice, and his expression was full of savage curiosity. And that was the man who—" There was no more. The story stopped at that point. "That was exactly when he came in," said Gretl to herself, but there were another few words scribbled below, and, peering closely, she managed to make them out. "Oh, this is impossible. How can I write an ending to this story? I'll have to make it up when I get there and hope I'll do it well. If I come up with something good, the devil can have my soul." Gretel's eyes widened and she bit her lip in horror. People shouldn't say things like that. "Well," she said to herself, "he started it all off and I'm going to make him finish it. You sit in here and keep warm, Prince Florian, if that's who you really are, and I'll go and fetch Fritz. He is the only one who can sort it out." So she threw on her cloak and set off to the house where Fritz the storyteller had his lodging. Meanwhile, Karl had been preparing the place in the mechanism of the great clock that was set aside for his masterpiece. Feverish with excitement, he hurried down the staircase of the clock tower and across the square to the inn. The old cat Putsy was still outside, sitting on the window-sill, watching everything as he licked his paws and cleaned his ears. It was cold out there, and he was wondering about coming in for a snooze by the stove, but Karl didn't notice him. He had other things than cats on his mind. He went in quietly and shut the door. And then he stopped in alarm, for there was the canvas thrown aside, and there was Sir Ironsoul, sword upraised, on the other side of the room. Karl's heart missed a beat. Had someone else come in and disturbed the little knight? There was no one dead, at least, but why had the figure moved? Karl looked around, and then he saw the little prince sitting politely in his chair watching him. 1,000 strange fears ran over his skin. Karl opened his mouth to speak, and then realised that the child wasn't alive after all. It was another clockwork figure like Sir Ironsoul, and a far finer one by the look of it. He peered at it closely. The hair, the finest gold wires he had ever seen, the bloom on the silver cheeks like a butterfly's wing, the eyes, bright blue jewels, almost alive in the way they seemed to look at him. Only Dr. Calmenius could have created this, and he must have brought it for Karl. What did the figure do? Karl reached out and lifted the prince's hand from his lap. With a little flicker of his energy, Prince Florian shook Karl's hand and sang a bar of music for him. Karl's hair stood on end, for an idea had come to him. Why not put this figure in the clock instead of Sir Ironsole? It was more finely finished, and a handsome little boy who sang a pretty tune would be far more popular with the crowds than a faceless knight who did nothing but threaten people with a sword. And then he could keep Sir Ironsole for himself. And then, oh, how his mind raced! He could travel the world. He could become famous, giving exhibitions and demonstrations. He became quite dizzy as he thought of the uses to which he could put the metal knight. The gold he could steal, the forbidden treasures that could be his if he had a secret accomplice like Sir Ironsole, who could be relied on always to kill and never to give him away. All he would have to do would be to trick his intended victim into saying the word devil and leave Sir Ironsole nearby to play his part. He, Karl, could be somewhere else entirely, playing cards with a dozen witnesses, or even in church surrounded by the faithful. No one would ever know. So excited did he become that he lost all sense of what was right. The church, his father and mother and brother and sister, Herr Ringelmann, every influence for good he'd ever known was whirled away into darkness, and all he could see was the wealth and power that would be his if he used Sir Ironsole in that way. And before he could change his mind, he threw the canvas over the knight, touched the stiffening figure of Prince Florian under his arm, and set off back to the clock tower. Meanwhile, Gretl was struggling through the snow towards the house where Fritz lodged. She could see from the end of the street that all the windows were dark except one in the attic, where Fritz often used to work throughout the night. She had to knock half a dozen times before the landlady came grumbling to open the door. "Who is it? What do you want at this time of night?" "Oh, it's you, child. What in the world are you after?" "I've got to speak to Herr Fritz. It's very important." Mumbling and frowning, the old lady stepped aside and said, "Yes, I've heard all about that business at the inn, making up wicked stories, frightening people. I'll be glad when he's gone. In fact, I've got half a mind to give him notice. Go on, child, top of the stairs and keep going. No, you can't have a candle. This is the only one I've got, and I need it myself. You've got sharp eyes, make do." So Gretl climbed the 4 staircases to the top of the house, each one darker and narrower than the other one before, and came at last to a tiny landing where a line of light glowed beneath the door. There she knocked, and a nervous voice answered, "Who is it? What do you want?" "It's Gretl, Herr Fritz, from the inn. I've got to speak to you." "Come in then, as long as you're by yourself." Gretl opened the door. She found Fritz standing in the light of a smoky lamp, throwing paper after paper into a leather bag, which was bulging with his clothes and books and other bits and pieces. A glass of plum brandy stood on the table beside him. He had already drunk quite a lot by the look of him, for his eyes were wild, his cheeks were flushed, and his hair was standing on end. "What is it?" he said. "What do you want?" "That story you told us," Gretl began, but she got no further, for the young man put his hands over his ears and shook his head violently. "Don't speak of it. I wish I'd never begun it. I wish I'd never told a story in my life." "But you've got to listen to me," she said. "Something dreadful's going to happen, and I don't know what it is because you didn't finish writing the story." "How do you know I didn't finish it?" he said. She showed him the sheet of paper she'd found. He groaned and put his face in his hands. "Oh." "Groaning won't help," she said. "You've got to finish the story properly. What happens next?" "I don't know," he cried. "I dreamed the first part of it, and it was so strange and horrible that I couldn't resist writing it down and pretending it was mine. But I couldn't think of any more." "But what were you going to do when you got to that part?" she said. "Make it up, of course," he said. "I've done that before. I often do it. I enjoy the risk, you see. I start telling a story with no idea what's going to happen at the end, and I make it up when I get there. Sometimes it's even better than writing it down first. I was sure I could do it with this one, but when the door opened and the old man came in, I must have panicked. Oh, I wish I'd never begun. I'll never tell a story again." "You must tell the end of this one, though," said Gretl, "or something bad will happen. You've got to." "I can't." "You must." "I couldn't." "You have to." "Impossible," he said. "I can't control it any more. I wound it up and set it going, and it'll just have to work itself out. I wash my hands of it. I'm off." "But you can't. Where are you going?" "Anywhere. Berlin, Vienna, Prague, as far away as I can get." And he poured himself another glass of plum brandy and swallowed it all in one go. So your activity for this week is you're going to look at Gretl and you're going to look at Karl and look at their movements at the beginning of this chapter. So I've only given you half the bit, half part 3, and you're going to plot their actions in like a cartoon sketch. Look at the slideshow, go through it, and I've started it for you at the end so you can finish it and draw the pictures. Okay, so I will see you on Friday, and I'm hoping that we are going to finish the book on Friday together in school. So I'll see you then. Bye everyone.